part 2 of the video. So this is to do with the impact on relationships first of all. So different types of relationships it could refer to, so friendships, family relationships, romantic relationships. It just says the word relationships on the spec, but the sources could be more specific, but you can just twist these points to be more relevant or select the ones that are most relevant if it is more specific in the source. So the debate is, have the developments in digital social media allowed us to communicate more easily? Is that having a positive, beneficial impact on our relationships? Or is it quite detrimental? Does it mean that we spend less time having kind of intimate, meaningful interactions face to face? So the key studies that you've got, so Zhao, you can connect directly using social media platforms and they strengthen relationships. Short and Gan, the idea that it can decrease loneliness and depression, and increase your self-esteem because you can access social support 24/7. You could also use studies like Matthews, Putnam, what's his face, McLuhan for Global Village, those kind of things if you forgot those specific studies. So use those and make sure you give examples of the different platforms that you would be able to communicate with. So Zoom, WhatsApp, Snapchat, TikTok, whatever. And it looks very brief and is very brief, but remember the maximum mark for knowledge is 4 marks, so there is enough there. Negative impact, so Turkle, alone together, we spend more time on our devices, less time engaging with the people that we are with. Kraut, online communication lacks intimacy, it's hard to bond with them when you're not face to face. Bauman, postmodernist, young people may lack a sense of belonging previous generations had, and also social skills because they are using online communication as a substitute for face-to-face interactions, which is an inadequate replacement. Beach, you could say that relationships can be problematic, so grooming, catfishing, because the internet's anonymity allows people to create fake identities. Clayton, so Twitter-related conflict is the key term that they use, but obviously you can apply that to any network, any platform, sorry. So people argue about what each other's posting online. It can allow cheating. People can argue about the amount of time they spend on their phones rather than talking to them, etc. And if you feel like you're looking at this and you think that you want some more statistics, so I would advise, obviously, if you're going for AA star, just have a little scan through these and look at some statistics. There's loads in there, so just pick one that you think is going to be the easiest for you to remember. And then you can use this little key term as well, the iGen, so the new generation of iGeners. How they're the loneliest generation yet. So Twenge he's a psychologist, but you can use him and you can use his point to kind of go with Turkle, Kraut or Bauman mainly. Easy peasy. Impact on identity. So has it had a significant impact on our identity or not? Is kind of the key debate. Has it been positive or negative in terms of what the consequences are? And yeah, sorry, I was reading, so I couldn't couldn't do two things at once there. So key studies for the positive impact. So Ellison is a postmodernist. In the digital social world, people escape their traditional categories, no longer judged on their ascribed status, judged on their achieved, which I explained in a previous video. And then case, this idea that we're now cyborgs, part human, part machine. We become superhumans. We have powers that we didn't have. And then give an example of the type of tasks. So I think often people are like, okay, cyborgs, but what actually does that mean? You need to be able to explain it. So give an example. We can virtually be anywhere in the world. We can access any knowledge, so we can use the internet to gain knowledge instantly. Huge amounts of information can be stored and accessed and retrieved when needed. Multitask, etc. Negative impact on identity, or if you were then struggling again, you can use the general. Oh, actually, sorry, they're on the next page. Ignore me. Negative impact on identity. So the idea that we create a fake version of ourselves online, so a simulation, the identity we present in the virtual world does not align with our offline self. So this is called simulacra, it's a simulation. Case, we leave behind a social media footprint which really reveals a lot about our identity, can be damage to our reputation in the future with employers. So examples of like videos that could be released of our behaviour, or posts to do with our political views or personal relationships, or whatever it is that we posted online could be problematic if they were accessed by our employers, or I don't know, students, if you were a teacher, that kind of thing. Extras, Davis and Gardner. So young people kind of edit a performance online. They select very carefully how they present themselves and perform a socially desirable, polished online self. So, in terms of the optimum phrases used in their captions, in terms of editing their pictures, in terms of what they select, in terms of what to post about, all that kind of stuff. And then you can also use beach, because the issue that's relating to relationships is actually based on the capacity that is now available in terms of how you choose your identity. So it's an identity issue, so you can therefore use it in an identity question. Yeah, I'd read that. It's very interesting. I pretty much did my dissertation on this kind of thing, so I find it very interesting. But have a look. And I would say the cyborg things, make sure you understand that, because that's the kind of study that can go in pretty much any question ever on this whole unit, not even just this section, this whole unit. So, as I said in the previous video, they added this little red section. So, consider people's identity and social inequalities in relation to class, gender, and age. So that suggests we need 4 studies for each one, which is a lot. Obviously, if you don't remember all of these specific studies and you just use the generic ones, try and make your example more relevant to the gender or the age or the ethnic group or whatever it is, not ethnic group, sorry, class group that the question is about or source is about, but you will still get the majority of the marks if you just use those studies. Under no circumstances do you stop missing out paragraphs or missing out questions because it's very specific. You just have to apply more generic studies. Or remember, you don't have to have a study to get full marks. So these are here because they are an easy way to answer the question, but you could still do very well without them if you do forget. So for gender, you've got Haraway, which I explained in the previous paragraph. Previous video. Cochrane, fourth wave feminism. So the idea of reclaiming the feminist identity. So make sure you're making it about identity. Costa, this is interesting. So it's the idea that young Muslims in Turkey that she specifically researched portrayed themselves differently depending on who they were posting to. So they had like different Instagram accounts and kind of selected how much information they gave or how they presented themselves. And they were usually to do with the traditional values for their gender, traditional norms and values of their gender and their culture or religion. So in this case, the women were presenting themselves as modest and pure. The men were more likely to portray themselves as successful in terms of their jobs, in terms of being a provider. And they had like close friends lists on Instagram or different accounts where they might show themselves in front of their family or in front of male or female peers differently. Sorry, my phone is going absolutely mad. And then Bates, you can use like the male gender identity and this having a negative impact on females' identities because of the development of the deviant subculture of incels who are misogynists. And just make sure if you're using other points, you're twisting them to identity. It's not about inequality, it's about identity. Social class. So Ellison obviously works every time. Matthews, so you could say like one traditional aspect of the middle class identity is that they have social capital, but this has become more accessible to the working class. You could say it's like a form of embourgeoisement where the working class are becoming more middle class in their norms and values. Cats, so not a memorable study, but young people gain symbolic capital amongst their peers because they can, if they can afford devices. So the idea you get more status amongst your friends if you've got the latest iPhone. And there's a kind of inequality between the middle class and the working class because the middle class have more money, so they can afford more prestigious devices. And then Toyama, the idea that, this is kind of evaluating Matthews, that it's still social capital and online networks are mainly part of the middle class identity still. Age, Ellison again. Heart, so this idea of sharing your identity with others in the form of an autobiography. Turkle, so this is very similar to her point of alone together, but it's slightly more to add. So young people are not able to develop a sense of self anymore. It's as if their thoughts and feelings are not real until they've been validated by others online. So the idea of like introspection and just that thinking independently, those thoughts aren't real until they're validated. So she says, I share, therefore I am. So the idea that you have to be, you need somebody else to confirm your thoughts for them to actually be real. Davis and Gardner, so this idea of the management and editing of how you present yourself online, specifically talks about young people. And you can also, in this paragraph, use Prensky's point here of digital natives. That works quite well as like the young people's identity, which I'll go on to when I get on to inequalities. So again, for social inequalities, you have to consider the specific links to class, gender, and age. So the general argument, the general debate is that inequalities have increased due to developments in digital media. Others believe that it now allows disadvantaged groups to challenge power. So the first point that can be used anywhere is that women, youths, and the elderly and the working class, so any disadvantaged group, previously had muted voices, but digital media provides them with a platform to be heard. So Castells is saying that digital media can be used to organise protests, to give them a voice, to give them a platform, so that other people can, I don't know, be aware of the issues that this group are facing. And you can use that for anything, and then just give an example that's more specific to that group. So, I don't know, if it's young people, you can talk about student protests. If it's women, talk about the Me Too movement, etc. Boyd says that hierarchies that exist online also exist offline, so therefore the voices of those groups would still lack impact. So it could be to do with like the power they have to amplify their voice, or it could be that the idea they'd be more likely to be discredited. Obviously, the way social media works, it's not as anonymous as some sociologists have kind of claimed. Like, people often have videos or photos on their social media profiles, so therefore they could still be discredited. Another point, is there another page on this? Oh yeah, you can link it on that, so ignore me. So for gender, the positive element, fourth wave feminism can be used to challenge inequalities. However, you could argue that digital media has provided whole new ways of exploiting women that didn't exist previously. So illegal porn, the violence against women, increased sex trafficking. It's the fastest growing crime. Things like that. Social class, you can use Matthews versus Toyama, so the social inequality studies in relation to social capital. If you were really struggling, it's not the best, but you can use the Marxist studies to say how it's kind of increasing the wealth gap between the rich and the poor as well. Age. Palmer talks about children growing up in a toxic childhood. Digital media is used as a babysitter, and it can have like lots of negative implications for children. Then this point here is the positive for young people and the negative for old people. So young people, according to Prensky, are digital natives. The article is there if you want to read more about it, but the idea that they've grown up in a technological world, they're very skilled in operating media, they feel at home there, and you could link it to like Hart, the idea that they use it to communicate their autobiography. However, older people are digital immigrants. They have to learn to navigate a new world that they have found themselves in. So that's the problem, that inequality for old people, but then the shift towards equality for young people. And then digital divide is decreasing. According to Boyle, the elderly are becoming more competent. They can use it to reconnect with old friends, etc. Yeah, you can say like increasing their social capital, they're reducing their kind of depression or loneliness, etc. And again, you can use this to find stats if you want more to pad out these paragraphs. Here we did this research, so we filled this out. So make sure you know a couple of examples because you need them in your paragraph. They're not get in your paragraphs. They're not going to give anybody the top marks if they can't give an example of a social movement in a social movement question. So make sure you have got those examples, the Me Too movement, anything else that you know about that we may not have even studied in the lesson. It could be from, I don't know, if you do politics, or it could be from your own knowledge, whatever. So, social movements and change. So, this is the idea that digital media provides greater support for social movements. It's like a catalyst to mobilize those social movements and get them to be more successful in achieving their aims. But then the other side of it is that it's made them less successful or provides more opportunities for the elite to control them and inhibit the process. So, social movements and social change, we've got Kirkpatrick and we've got Castells. So, the Facebook effect allows change to happen because information can be spread to millions of people very rapidly. And give an example. So, the Black Lives Matter movement was able to gain significant amount of support very quickly. They had a hashtag and lots of people could follow that on Twitter, etc., to find out information. Castells provides a platform for people with muted voices. They can organise protests and campaigns. So you could refer to women and the Me Too movement. Previously, they were very absent from um, media narratives, whereas now they are able to set up blog pages and Instagram accounts for people to follow and gain information about the movements. They've organised women's marches, etc. Gain whatever it's called, online campaigns, petitions. That's what I'm looking for. Petitions for people to sign, and so on. Then the evaluation. Sometimes these movements are unsuccessful because they result in either armchair activism, so the idea you're sat in your armchair thinking you're being active, or slacktivism, so the idea that you're a bit slack in your activism, so not putting much effort into it. So in the past, movements were successful because people showed long-term commitment and were very invested, whereas now people are just a bit lazier. They think by posting a hashtag or posting the black square on their Instagram page to amplify the voices of ethnic minorities for one day is going to make a difference, when actually it's less successful. And Bagdikian, so the idea that the bourgeoisie or the government can they own the platforms, so therefore they can exercise control over people by either shutting down the internet. So in Egypt during the Arab Spring movement, they literally just shut down the internet to stop people from communicating about where the protests were going to be. They are able to censor information, so block accounts that are saying things negative about the government. Dissenters, so people that are speaking out against the government, can be tracked down. So I would look into the Arab Springs and use them as an example for Bagdikian's point. Other things that could be relevant here, so just think about how these could be important depending on what the question is. But you could argue, so if the question is specifically about social change, because that's one of the bullet points, sometimes social movements are resisting change. They want to prevent us from becoming a new type of society. So Atwan talks about the Islamic State, and he says that the social movement is resisting social change. So it wants to return our society back to how it was in modern society. So they're kind of rejecting the shift to post-modernity. So they want to reduce the changes such as liberalism, equal rights, family diversity, secularization, all of those kind of things, and return to traditional ways of life. So this would be an evaluation point to the idea that social change is not happening. There isn't a digital revolution. We want to go back to a traditional society. So At1 talks about Islamic State, and then the sociologist called Howard talked about Christian fundamentalism as well, in the same idea. Jurgensen, digital media has allowed for the augmented revolution, and rather than manufacturing consent, social media plays a key role in manufacturing dissent. So manufacturing dissent is this idea. So online, people can be educated about how they've been brainwashed, and then that can be used to recruit people into social movements to advocate revolutions or to participate in protests, etc. So it manufactures dissent, so it informs people to then reject or rebel against the government. And this idea of the augmented revolution is that the online and the offline world intersect and complement each other. So offline events such as police brutality can be videoed and posted online, and that can lead to more people being aware of the problems. And then online, they can then create petitions or organise protests against institutional racism, which then exist again offline. So it's the idea that the two shouldn't be seen as separate spheres. They are, that they benefit each other. They're a mutual sphere. So that works quite nicely as a conclusion against these ideas that offline is different to online. But this is hard. Read the article again if you want to, but if you don't get it, just ignore it. But I think this is very high level, and examiners will be very impressed if you can use this well. Documentary about the protests in Hong Kong, or remember Hong Kong is capitalist, so you can use that for the Marxist one as well. Role of social media in the London riots, always an easy one to refer to. And then our government, so it was David Cameron at the time, discussed in Parliament should they be able to shut the internet down, because at the time it was Blackberries. I don't know if you're too young to remember Blackberries, but we used to have BBM, so BlackBerry Messenger, and that's how people communicated. It's like the old version of like a WhatsApp. If they could shut that down, then people wouldn't have known where to go for the protest. Okay, conflict, so also a bullet point. So a good study to know for this one is Huntington, but there are obviously other ways that you can talk about conflict, which are these two extras that you need to know anyway. So Huntington argues that globalization has led to more conflict because the competition for power is more visible. So we're more aware of what's going on. So if you think about relative deprivation, the idea that you want what others have and you look at those around you is based on the idea that you can see what they have. And historically, we wouldn't know what was happening in other countries. But now people are much more aware. There's kind of growing resentment towards the West because they obviously dominate global communications, and also because of globalization, individual nations have less. Individual nations are less likely to be kind of at war with each other, but it's actually whole cultures. Sorry, Peanut. So this is an example that they use, not me. Peanut. Shh. So they're different examples that you can use that they use. Peanut, shh. Castells, again, this idea of organising protests, we've said it a million times, and then specifically that can result in riots. Evaluation, so this is the idea that it reduces conflict, so it's more positive. So Sutton says quite a few different things. I haven't linked his article, but actually Huntington's article's down there. I'd recommend reading that one. So Sutton, social media can be used to help resolve conflict. So charities, Amnesty International, Red Cross, all those kind of things can be used to highlight human rights violations and provide support. Sutton also says how awareness can be raised in situations where there's disasters, so wars, even natural disasters, terrorist attacks. They can be used to raise awareness of what the problem has been at that time. So you can use Sutton for that kind of thing. Neophiliacs in general, it's a source of positivity, improved communication, connection. The changes in society are positive, not negative. You can use someone like Putnam, the idea of social solidarity, bringing people together, creating virtual communities rather than dividing people and causing problems in society. These 2 points also show the idea of conflict. So Seabrook, the integration into a single global society is a declaration of a cultural war from the West onto other cultures. The implication is that the West view their culture as superior, and this leads to other cultures being hostile and resisting the imperialism imposed on them. So therefore is the idea of rejecting this cultural invasion of Western products and values, interfering and taking over in other countries. Atwan, so again, the idea of religious fundamentalist movements, obvious example of conflict, so using methods such as terrorism and war to advocate for their cause. And one example could be the Islamic State. So just some examples there. As I've said before, you're not going to get top marks if you can't give an example, so make sure you give the examples I've said. If you need more information, scan these articles for statements that you can use to support your points. Obviously, we did that before, so these are studies that support the idea of cultural defence, so cultures maintaining their traditional values and not participating in globalisation or cultural homogenisation, and the sociologist that says that some cultures do not participate is called call. So you can use call, and any of those work is an example that he would talk about. Oops. So the debate here is cultural homogenization happening? Are all cultures merging into one, or is the world all becoming like America? Is the West dominating and everyone else is kind of merging into that, or are people resisting that and defending their authenticity? So studies that you have, so cultural homogenization is happening. So Ritzer is talking about values. Remember, this is about values. Don't think that they're talking about burgers, because they're not. They're saying that the values associated with McDonald's are becoming widespread across institutions globally. So those are the 4 values. And then you can say things like different organisations such as supermarkets are improving their efficiency through self-checkout machines. Different what else can I say? Calculability, so like making more profit by having, I don't know why I literally can't think of one example of calculability right now. Yeah, so you can use self-checkout machines again to say like calculability, because you have to hire less staff because the machines do the job for you. Control, so the same message being given out by call centres, so talking to a robot rather than a human is an example of control. Efficiency could be like multiple choice questions that are marked automatically within schools. So those ideas that the same things are happening in a widespread manner. So just give an example of one of those as an institution. So it's about values, not products. So predictability would be like the same menu in lots of different places, so people know what the process is going to be. A sense of familiarity. I can't even say that word. It's more familiar. Gordon is talking about products. So co-colonization is happening. Every country in the world is beginning to sell the same products. Give an example of anything. Coca-Cola, Starbucks, Nike, Apple, whatever. And then other studies, you could use McLuhan, the idea of a global village. So we share the same culture, we're all interdependent because everyone obviously is communicating and sharing things. Is there anything else for homogenization? Oh, you can use the actual just definitions. So Giddens and Cochrane and Payne also would work as well. Again, just focus on making sure that you've got examples that you can give. Ritz's 4 values and McDonaldizations there, if you need more explanation on that. Obviously, again, remember, you don't need to explain all 4, just state what they are and then give one example of one thing. You don't need to go into huge amounts of detail. Cultural defence. So Seabrook's idea of the declaration of a cultural war. So the idea that cultures outside of the West are trying to resist the imperialism and maintain a sense of authenticity. And then you can use, a variety of examples to support that, from like here, or yeah. This could, Krotow and Hoynes. So globalization, that's not a typo. Globalization is the idea that it's merging the global and the local. So global corporations, companies that are multinational, are adapting their products to the local culture. So rather than globalization replacing cultures, they are adapting their products to the sort of specific traditions, and therefore there is a sense of like Western domination in terms of companies like McDonald's, and co-colonization is happening, but it doesn't mean that local cultures have been completely lost. So you can use the examples of the different McDonald's menus that we looked at. So the McCurry pan in India is the one that always sticks out to me because it looks phenomenal. And then also, in case it kind of comes up as a question that's like, is it always the Western influence? So if it's specifically about like, is the West influencing other cultures? This is quite a good evaluation point, because you can argue that reverse colonization is also taking place. So that's the key word. So reverse colonization is taking place. Less developed countries can influence the culture of the West. So the Mexicanization of California. So Mexico is less developed than the United States, but they've significantly influenced California in terms of, particularly food and drink. So the influence is kind of in reverse. So it's not a one-way process of Western influence. And that is it. We've done that in the first video. So just remember, the sources are very broad. You need to pull out the parts of the source that are relevant. So if there was a question on cultural homogenization and then it suddenly says something about patriarchal ideology, that's not your source link for the cultural homogenization question. You've got to pull out the most relevant parts of the source. And then, sorry, let me just scroll to the top. Remember to give examples. For the love of God, give examples, and just very brief, like 4 or 5 words. So the Black Lives Matter movement achieved this by, and then say what they did, like, I don't know, recruiting people through their media hashtag, full stop. Making synoptic links throughout the unit, so you will guaranteed get some vague question that's not specific to one page of the booklet. Make sure you know the studies well enough to just pull them out and link them to whatever it is that comes up. So as long as you're confident in your knowledge, you can answer any question. If you forget the name of the sociologist, it's fine, just answer the question with the key terms that you have, the examples that you have, if you don't remember the studies, but obviously that's the best way to answer them with the studies. Have an opinion, so for each debate decide what you think, and then you can conclude if you know what you think. Don't decide in the exam whether you agree that social capital's increased or not, just go in with an opinion and then make sure you tailor it to the question. Be as concise as possible. So the maximum knowledge in every question is 4. So do not be going on massive tangents. It's important that you get off this section after 40 minutes and get straight onto globalization. Straight onto education, sorry. And then structures, 9 mark. So 2 paragraphs linking to the source, 10 mark. You can obviously make that separate, it's up to you. But make sure you link to the source and make sure you evaluate and make sure you conclude. Essential to evaluate and conclude in the 10 mark. Loads of people don't do that. It's a silly, silly way to lose marks. The 16 mark, 4 against conclusion. If you have time, put a second study in your against. And have a look at the sources. Sometimes the question will say with reference to both sources. Sometimes it could say with reference to the sources, like that, which means you decide whether you refer to one or both. It could say refer to source A. You don't know. You need to read the question and make sure if it says that refer to both, if it says refers to source A, or if it does this, sources, and that you need to decide whether you're referring to one, the other, both. But our knowledge for globalization is so good, you can 100%, literally get 100% on this this section of the paper. So just make sure that you're reading the questions, you're specifically answering them, and you're following the correct structures. And you're being as concise as possible because you need to move on, because education is big. Anyway, good luck. You've got this, guys.